Hello, divine creations, divine marvels, children of God. Thank you so much for dropping by this video. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about how and why Neo-Advaita, pseudo non-duality, will drive you crazy and how I recovered from it. So first and foremost, a quick definition. What is Neo-Advaita? What is pseudo non-duality? Well, I have a whole web page about that, which you can check out, and I've made many videos about that. The short answer is that Neo-Advaita is a teaching, I hesitate to even call it a teaching, that borrows language from traditional non-duality, and then it'll teach one of two things. It'll teach there's nothing to do since you're already enlightened. I call that pseudo non-duality. That's the crazy, super crazy non-duality. And or it'll teach you just practice self-inquiry. That's all you need to do. That's the kind of Neo-Advaita I spent a lot of time in. And both of them are very common. And neither of them are non-duality. They've borrowed little bits and pieces. Regardless, so they'll both drive you crazy for a variety of reasons. But today I want to talk about detachment. That's a buzzword that you hear thrown around Neo-Advaita sat songs. How important it is to be detached from worldly things and only attached to yourself, and so forth and so on. And in looking at this, I hope to help people understand how Neo-Advaita truly is pseudo-Advaita or pseudo non-duality. So in traditional non-duality, it's true, well, sort of true, that detachment is talked about and said it's a necessity. But actually, that's not the full truth, because traditional Advaita is not written or taught in English. Yes, people teach it in English, but they draw on a philosophy that is written in Sanskrit. And in Sanskrit, the primary word that gets mistranslated as detachment is vairagya. So ragya means deep, intense desire, and vai means absence of. So the word that gets mistranslated as detachment is, again, vairagya, and a more accurate translation would be absence of binding or intense desire. Because a binding or intense desire, see, we all have preferences, even people this is what Neo-Advaita gets wrong. Even someone who is self-realized still has preferences. The difference between a self-realized person and an ordinary person is a self-realized person is absolutely fine if they don't get their preferences met. No problem. Yes, they would prefer this, and if this happens, okay, no worries. Partially because they're immersed in the self. So, if they wanted a particular type of coffee and it's not available, no big deal. They're immersed in eternal peace. If they're running late for something, no problem. They're immersed in the eternal peace, and they trust in God completely. That's another thing that a lot of Neo-Advaita satsang teachers don't like to talk about, is God, because they're not really in relationship with God and they don't really trust in God. But that's a whole nother topic. Today we'll talk about vairagya. So that's another thing that, I'm tempted to call it BS non-duality and spell out what BS stands for, because this is so twisted. This teaching that once you're enlightened, you have no desires. Absolute ridiculousness, and absolutely very harmful. Not only untrue, but very harmful. Like I could say, in English, you call this a blah, 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 when actually in English, you call this a cup. Untrue, what I said, right, but not a problem. Like it's not going to cause any harm. This absurd teaching of having no desires, that's what enlightenment is. Not only is it untrue, it's very harmful. Very harmful. No desires, no life. No desires, no breathing. No desires, no eating. No desires, no impulse to say. Self-realization is having no desires. So anyone who tells you that is lying. Desire is the foundation of life. No desire, no eating, breathing, or drinking. This comes from people who have, so how did this come about? Well, these Neo-Advaita teachers have declared themselves enlightened and declared themselves fit to teach people. See, in traditional non-duality, you don't declare yourself a guru. Someone who is a guru, who had a guru, who had a guru, all the way back to Shankara. This is an Advaita Vedanta, traditional Indian non-duality. Someone who has training, who was trained by someone, who was trained by someone, who was trained by someone, says, you know what, you're fit to now go out and train people. No such thing as a self-made guru in actual non-duality. The reason why this is so important is because the process of Advaita Vedanta, and yes, it's a process, is like intense soul surgery. Would you go for a surgery where they open up your body and someone's like poking around to someone who is not exquisitely trained? Only if you were crazy, right? Or delusional. Or so Advaita Vedanta is soul surgery. It is surgery on your psyche, on the deepest parts of your being, and to expose yourself. And I did it for 20 years. So when I say you, I mean me, to expose myself to someone who is untrained, unqualified, and ultimately faking it, they weren't actually enlightened, was one of the cruelest things I ever did to myself. Granted, I didn't know any better. Most people don't know any better. These people put on a good show, and then they have a whole group of people around them who then bolster the show. It's like the people around the fake teachers are like the bells and whistles that seem to give validity to what's going on, but it truly is a circus. I would add it's a demonic circus, but we can talk about what I mean by that another time. So vairagya doesn't mean detachment, and it doesn't mean absence of desires. It means absence of intense binding desires. We've all felt it. Like let's say you're interested in someone. Let's say you're romantically interested in someone. So it's one thing to be like, I'm interested in that person. I want to get to know them. So that's a desire. A binding desire is, oh my God, I have to be with Janet or Sam or Uma. I have to be with them. Oh my God, they're so perfect. If I'm not with them, I don't think I can bear it. That's a vairagya. That's a binding desire. See, the difference between the two is, in the first one, it's like, oh, they're interesting. I'd like to get to know them. And let's say you get to know them and it ends up they're married. Like, oh, too bad. Oh, well, I guess I'll go meet someone else. So that the first energy doesn't bind you. The second energy does. So I just like to close with a prayer for everyone who's caught in the Neo-Advaita circus. Again, it's a demonic circus. It truly is a circus, and it truly is demonic. Maybe I'll talk about that sometime. And it will drive you insane, because just on this one topic I've talked about today, because it puts you at war with yourself. On the one hand, you're like, I want a relationship. And then on the other hand, like, no, I shouldn't want anything. And it doesn't offer you a way out of that. So it just kind of cycles around. And to boot, if you practice self-inquiry when you're not prepared for it, it creates a dissociative state. I actually worked with someone one-on-one who has like 6 or 7 friends that are part of a Neo-Advaita organization that's kind of cultish. Some days I'm like, yeah, it's a cult. Some days I'm like, it's a conservative religion. And he has 6 or 7 people who they are stuck. They've had this spiritual shift to where they know they're the witness. It's not up here. They're like, yeah, I'm the witness, but they feel suicidal all day. So they're just kind of witnessing themselves feeling suicidal, like all day long. And they just turn away from those suicidal feelings and they get this temporary relief. And then it's complex why, but they're not able to do it all day long. So then they come back to this place of then the suicidal feelings come back. And it's like, that's where they live. They're like zombies because they didn't properly prepare. In traditional non-duality, you don't practice self-inquiry until there's a set of preparations. They're called the sadhana chantusha, or the 4 means of liberation. I'm going to put a link. Adi Shankara taught them. Ramana Maharshi, he taught them in a more simplified form. But so these people are trapped, and their fake teacher is like, oh, it's just a phase. It'll pass. Just keep inquiring. Well, inquiry before they were ready is what got them there in the first place. So I just like to close with a prayer for all the people who are caught in this web. And please, to all the true gurus and helpers who, in my experience and my view, are able to help even though they no longer have a physical body. Please, for all the people who are trapped in this, just the light of wisdom upon them, the power to leave, and to know there's hope, to know that there is another way. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Because for so long, I thought that, because that's part of how Neo-Advaita works, is it lies and says, what I'm teaching is the absolute truth. It's the only way. That's kind of the brainwashing portion. And so then people get stuck in this loop. So the way I found my way out was to study the Bhagavad Gita, to study what Ramana Maharshi actually taught. And there's a great online book called Day by Day with Bhagavan, and you'll see, you read it, it's unedited Ramana Maharshi. Most things that are, most books that of Ramana Maharshi are actually edited Ramana Maharshi, so you don't get the full picture. And then I read a book called Be As You Are, and it is edited, but one of the things is it has a very holistic view of Ramana's teachings. It talks about self-inquiry, it talks about bhakti, it talks about surrender, it talks about mantra, it talks about kundalini, it talks about all the things that Neo-Advaita teachers don't want to talk about. And through reading that book, I was able to see, oh my God. And there's a few references that self-inquiry isn't the only path. And at a certain point, I was like, oh my God, these teachers are teaching something completely different from Ramana, or they're taking little bits and pieces, and then they're actually attacking other things that Ramana Maharshi said. So that's what popped me out. And then I started to have the grace to find some traditional Advaita teachers who taught the full spectrum of And then I actually got to have some one-on-one association with an actual Advaita Vedanta teacher who was aware of Neo-Advaita and who speaks to it. And once I experienced actual Advaita Vedanta, it was just over and done with. And by the way, I'm not currently pursuing Advaita Vedanta as a path. I'm pursuing other things. But it's almost like you have to, I had to experience actual Advaita Vedanta to break free of fake, let's just call it what it is, fake Advaita Vedanta. So that was my way out, and now I'm exploring other paths. That I'm exploring paths that feel more resonant with me and also support me in having a day-to-day life. To see, traditional Advaita Vedanta will give you a compass for how to live. Neo-Advaita just teaches you how to dissociate. You know, Ramakrishna himself, Ramakrishna, a great saint, he said, Advaita Vedanta is only for people who have no attachments. No, there I go again, no vairagya or ragya, you know, intense longings with the world. Ramana Maharshi himself said it's only for people who feel complete with earthly life, who aren't seeking pleasure. And there are periods where I would do that, but I was depressed. So that doesn't count. Like, you need to have discernment. It's really only for people who kind of have the consciousness of a monk or a nun, who just aren't seeking in the world. If you're seeking in the world and you follow that teaching, you'll go nuts. And I would know, because I did. But a true teacher, a true Advaita teacher, a true non-duality teacher will equip you for how to live life well, and will only introduce self-inquiry when you're ripe for it. Thank you so much for dropping by. I wish you a beautiful, beautiful day. Take care.